The trucks arrived past midnight. The Oklahoma wind carried dust and silence, broken only by the low hum of engines and the clatter of boots. Inside, the trucks sat men who once served under the Iron Cross, men trained to fear the light of search beams and tracer rounds. But as the convoy turned through the gate of Camp Gruber in early 1944, something stunned them into silence. Floodlights bathed the entire compound in a pale white glow. Towers gleamed, barracks shimmered, and the flagpole cast a sharp shadow across the gravel yard. It was as bright as noon. One prisoner whispered, "They're not afraid of bombers?" The guard beside him didn't answer. To these men from the ruins of Europe, light had always meant danger, exposure, death. In Germany, every city had been ordered to vanish after dusk. But here, the Americans refused to hide. That night, Lieutenant Karl Brenner, who had once commanded a flak battery near Hamburg, noted in his pocket diary, "Here, light is not a weakness, it is a kind of faith." He watched as guards laughed near the mess hall under electric lamps, the sound of their radios faint in the background. No one flinched. No one ducked for cover. In Germany, entire neighborhoods had lived behind blackout curtains. Children learned to recognize the sound of air raid sirens before they could spell their own names. Yet, in this distant land, light poured freely through windows. Brenner stared at a single bulb above the gate and thought of his wife, who used to whisper, "Turn it off, Carl. They might see us." Now, surrounded by a country unafraid to glow, he realized he was witnessing more than a prison camp. It was a civilization built on confidence, not fear, a place where light no longer betrayed you, but protected you. In that moment, every flicker of electricity became a symbol. Each bulb hummed with defiance against the darkness of war. Here, light meant life. There, light had meant death. And somewhere in between, the first crack appeared in everything these men thought they knew. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Share your location and local time in the comments. Let us know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? In the dim barracks of Camp Gruber, the smell of pine boards and soap hung in the air. Karl Brenner sat on his bunk with a small envelope trembling in his hands. It was marked Zurückhalt from Berlin, December 1943. The handwriting was his wife's. Inside, the letter described a night of silence and smoke. "Carl," she wrote, "our windows are painted black. Little Anna cries each evening when we blow out the candles. She says she cannot see her dolls. I tell her the dark will keep us safe." He folded the page carefully. Around him, other prisoners traded bread for tobacco, joked in low tones, or stared at the bare bulb swinging from the ceiling. A light so simple, yet so forbidden in their memories. That single bulb glowed like a quiet rebellion against everything they had left behind. At night, Brenner remembered Berlin's blackouts, the entire city wrapped in darkness, as if ashamed to exist. The sky pulsed red from fires far away. Searchlights clawed upward, and people prayed the bombers would pass. He remembered how the silence after each raid felt heavier than the explosions. It was a civilization terrified of its own reflection. Now, in America, even small children walked beneath street lamps. He had seen them during transport through Kansas, boys on bicycles, girls with ribbons in their hair, laughing beneath porch lights that stayed on through the night. That image haunted him more than any air raid. How could a nation at war allow such innocence to remain visible? Sergeant Otto Lang, once an engineer from Dresden, muttered from the next bunk, "They waste electricity as if the sky were theirs." Brenner replied softly, "Perhaps it is." The guards, overhearing, exchanged a smile. They knew that light was part of morale, a promise that no bomber would dictate their nights. The Americans had built entire factories around this belief, that illumination itself could be a weapon of hope. One evening, as the wind rattled the tin roof, Brenner closed his eyes and imagined Anna reading a book beneath a lamp, without fear, without curtains. That fantasy, once impossible, now seemed like the definition of victory. He realized that war was not only fought with planes and guns, but with confidence, the courage to let the world see you. And in that small wooden room, beneath that unblinking bulb, he whispered to himself, "We lost the light long before we lost the war." Morning fog drifted across the Ohio River as a truckload of German prisoners arrived at the Westinghouse electric plant in Mansfield in the spring of 1944. Their boots echoed on the concrete floor as the vast factory swallowed them in heat and sound. Conveyor belts clattered, glass globes shimmered in long rows. Every corner blazed with light. For men raised on scarcity and blackout drills, it was almost holy. Thousands of women and older men worked side by side, their hands moving faster than the prisoners could follow. Overhead, banners read, "Light for Victory," and "Every bulb counts." Supervisors shouted figures. 20,000 bulbs today. Next target, 150. Numbers so vast that Brenner's mind refused to process them. In Germany, one small factory might have reached a tenth of that. Private Heinrich Voss, who had once studied physics in Munich, stared at the vacuum pumps and tungsten filaments. "They produce perfection by repetition," he muttered. "We produce perfection by control." The difference hit him harder than captivity itself. Lunch came at noon. Sandwiches, coffee, and laughter. The Americans did not hide their smiles. Their optimism felt as mechanical and constant as the machines. One worker, a woman named Alice from Pennsylvania, offered Brenner a cup of black coffee and said, "You boys ever seen a place run this bright?" He hesitated before answering. "In our country, the lights go out before the planes come." She only nodded and replied, "Ours stay on so the planes know what they're fighting for." By evening, Brenner's hands were coated with glass dust, but his mind was burning with a strange thought. Light was not just utility here. It was faith made visible. Each bulb represented defiance. Each glowing filament was a declaration that fear could be manufactured out of existence. In the mess hall, a foreman gave them a simple talk. "Every bulb you pack goes to a hospital, an airfield, a ship. You're not just prisoners. You're part of keeping our boys alive." The words struck harder than discipline ever could. For the first time, Brenner wondered whether he was helping his enemy or humanity. That night, he looked out through the wire fence. The factory lights reflected on the river, turning the black water silver. He thought of his wife's letter, of Anna's fear of the dark. And he whispered, almost in prayer, "If only they could see this brightness." The realization settled in him quietly, heavier than any order or ideology. America didn't produce light to conquer. It produced light to believe. The summer heat of 1944 lay heavy over the small town of Coffeyville, Kansas. Beyond the endless wheat fields stood a steel tower with a single lamp at its top, shining across the dusty highway. One evening, as Brenner and the other prisoners were marched back from a day's labor-clearing brush, they saw movement high above. A woman was climbing the tower, her silhouette cut sharply against the moonlit sky. She wore overalls, her hair tied in a red scarf, and in one hand, she carried a new light bulb. Brenner stopped in his tracks. "She's changing the bulb?" he asked. The American guard beside him, a quiet man from Missouri named Private Frank Harper, nodded. "It burned out this morning. She said folks get uneasy when the road's dark." The German stared upward. The woman reached the top, unscrewed the shattered bulb, and replaced it without hesitation. The light flared to life, spilling golden across the street and the small diner below. A few townsfolk clapped from the porch. Harper smiled faintly and said, "She does that every time. Says nobody should have to be afraid of the dark." Something in that sentence stayed with Brenner all night. Back in the barracks, the men argued about what they had seen. "She climbs without fear," said Voss. "In Berlin, even turning on a lamp could bring punishment." Another added, "A woman risking her neck for light. What kind of nation does that?" Harper passed them coffee through the fence the next morning. He mentioned the woman's name, Clara Miller, whose husband was overseas flying a bomber somewhere in Europe. "She keeps the tower lit for him," Harper said, "so he knows what he's fighting for." That story traveled through the camp like folklore. To men who had been taught that light revealed weakness, Clara became a symbol of courage itself. They began fixing broken bulbs in their own barracks, sweeping the floors cleaner, leaving the lamps on longer. Brenner wrote in his diary that night, "She climbs higher than any soldier I've known, armed with nothing but a lamp. Perhaps her courage is the real victory." In a war measured by explosions and ruins, one woman's quiet act had done something remarkable. It had illuminated the very idea of humanity. Autumn 1944 brought a chill to Illinois, and the prisoners were sent north to assist maintenance crews near Chicago. The journey began before dawn, the air tinged with the metallic scent of rain and industry. As the trucks rolled through the outskirts, Brenner and his companions caught sight of something that defied imagination. The city itself glowed. From miles away, Chicago shimmered under a dome of light, glass towers gleaming like molten gold, windows alive with activity. The POWs fell silent. "It looks like a star that fell to Earth," Voss murmured. Brenner said nothing. He simply stared, unable to reconcile this vision with the Germany he remembered. Berlin's ashen ruins, the blackout curtains, the emptiness after curfew. When they arrived, the men were assigned to a maintenance depot near the river. From there, they could see reflections of neon signs rippling in the dark water. Coca-Cola, Wrigley, Marshall Fields. Even the bridges glowed with steady bulbs that stretched in perfect alignment. The sight disturbed them as much as it awed them. "They waste light," one prisoner muttered, but no one agreed. It wasn't waste, it was will. That evening, the foreman, a stout man named Henry Dalton, told them the city had not dimmed its lights once since 1941. "We don't hide," he said. "If we turn them off, fear wins." His words were casual, but they struck deep. Later, while unloading glass panes, Brenner met a young architect who explained that skyscrapers were designed not only for efficiency but for beauty. Light under glass, he called it. He showed the prisoner how each pane was angled to reflect the sky and amplify the city's brightness. "It's not just buildings," the man said. "It's a living constellation." That night, in the cramped quarters above the depot, Brenner wrote to himself, "They build their light to stand upright. In Berlin, our towers fell into dust. Here, theirs reached the heavens." As he looked through the small window, the city stretched before him. Endless, radiant, untamed. It wasn't arrogance he saw, but faith made tangible in architecture. He thought of the question he might ask the viewers of this story today. If your city went dark for a single night, would you fear the sky or light it again by dawn? For Brenner, the answer no longer belonged to war, but to what it meant to be alive. Winter swept through Oklahoma again before the war's end. Snow dusted the roofs of the barracks, turning the camp pale and silent. One afternoon, the prisoners received their long-delayed mail from Germany. Among the envelopes was a thin letter addressed to Karl Brenner. It had crossed an ocean under censors' stamps and months of waiting. Inside, his wife had written, "The nights are endless. We cannot even burn candles anymore. The wax is gone. Anna tries to study, but the shadows frighten her. When the bombs come, the dark feels like a living thing." The words trembled on the paper, faint from the pressure of her pen. Brenner sat for a long while without speaking. Around him, the hum of generators filled the air. Outside, lamps glowed along the perimeter fence. Ordinary, constant, effortless. The contrast crushed him. In America, light was so plentiful it guarded even prisoners. In Germany, mothers and children shivered in darkness, waiting for dawn that seldom brought relief. He walked to the edge of the yard where the guard, Harper, was smoking under a lamppost. "Does it ever stop burning?" Brenner asked. "Only when the world stops turning," Harper replied. That night, a sudden storm swept across the plains. Lightning struck a transformer and the camp went dark. For the first time since arrival, absolute blackness returned. Some prisoners gasped. One even whispered, "Finally." But in that silence came an unease they hadn't expected. The feeling of being erased. Minutes later, the backup generators rumbled to life, and light exploded across the camp again, whiter and stronger. The prisoners shielded their eyes, as if from revelation. Brenner felt tears rising, not from fear, but from understanding. He realized how deeply the human soul depends on the simple courage to see and be seen. He wrote in his diary, "Tonight I learned that darkness can protect you from danger, but it can also protect lies." To those watching this story now, consider this. If you lived through a war, would you rather hide in safety or live in the open light of truth? What would you choose when the power goes out? To wait or to relight it yourself? The storm passed and the lamps kept burning. For the first time, the Germans stopped calling them enemy lights. They called them ours. April 46. The war was over, but its shadow still clung to Europe. The trains that once carried soldiers to battle now brought them home. Thinner, quieter, older in spirit. Among them was Karl Brenner, carrying nothing but a small duffel and a single American light bulb wrapped carefully in cloth. He had hidden it through inspections, a secret he could not explain even to himself. Berlin greeted him with ruin. Streets he once patrolled as an officer were now cracked open, buildings hollowed by fire. At night, the city was darker than he remembered, a silence that felt like guilt. The government had restored rationing, but there was no electricity, no warmth. People cooked over makeshift stoves, their faces lit by flickering candles. Children drew on walls with coal because paper was too rare. Brenner found his old apartment, a ghost of itself. The ceiling leaked, the windows shattered, the walls smelled of dust and smoke. Yet on the table, beside a rusted kettle, he set down the American bulb. He screwed it into the old socket, ran a thin wire to a car battery, and waited. A faint hum, then light. It filled the room with a fragile glow, barely enough to read by, but enough to reveal the tears in his eyes. His neighbor, Frau Klein, peeked through the doorway, clutching her shawl. "Is it American?" she asked. "Yes," Brenner said softly. "And it still works." Word spread through the building. Children gathered in the hallway, staring at the tiny circle of gold shining through the cracks. It was more than brightness. It was memory made visible. In that ruined city, one small bulb became a monument to what he had witnessed. A nation that refused to fear its own light. He no longer saw America as an enemy of Germany, but as an enemy of darkness itself. He sat down and opened his diary for the last time. "I once believed power was the right to destroy. Now I see. Real power is the courage to keep the lights burning." The glow reflected in the shattered window, mixing with the pale dawn over Berlin. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a prisoner. In a city that had once smothered its light, one American bulb burned through the night, not as conquest, but as proof that humanity could rebuild from the dark. Years later, when the last of the camps had vanished and the prisoners had become old men scattered across 2 continents, the memory of that light remained. It did not belong to America or Germany anymore. It had become something quieter, something human. Karl Brenner spent his final years as an electrician in Hamburg, fixing street lamps that had once gone unlit. Each time a bulb flickered to life, he paused for a moment, remembering the hum of the Westinghouse factory, the woman on the tower, the laughter of guards beneath lamps that never dimmed. Sometimes he wondered if history itself was a cycle of people learning to face light without fear. The same young men who once mocked American wastefulness would later teach their children how to wire their first lamps. They built homes with open windows. They walked at night without dread. Across oceans and decades, light became the quiet truce between former enemies. It is said that memory fades like the glow of a filament. Yet some lights never die. They simply move from one hand to another. The prisoners who had arrived under darkness left with an idea that could not be confiscated. That the measure of a civilization is not how loudly it fights, but how steadfastly it shines. If you look out your window tonight and see a light burning against the dark, perhaps it carries a whisper from that long-ago camp in Oklahoma. A reminder that freedom begins not with victory, but with the decision to keep the night at bay.